So I'd like to call to order the February 15th ADR meeting. The first thing I'll do before I'll have everybody introduce themselves first. I'm Mark Kruchnet, an ADR member.
Oh, so Mark Fritz, ADR member.
Laura Dewar.
I think we had trouble hearing Joey and Steven on that one. Sorry.
Sorry, I goofed up. I didn't push the button and I didn't have the green light. Joey Buckingham, ADR member. Hi.
And Steven, did you?
I got it now. Cool?
Now we can hear you. Perfect. Thank you. Great. So the first thing I'll do is have open time for public comments. If anybody on Zoom or in person wants to say anything that's not related to an agenda item tonight, you have up to 3 minutes to do so. It looks like we have no takers. So the first thing we'll do then after that is the approval of the minutes. I read through the minutes from the last meeting and they look fine. Someone wrote in a letter saying that potentially some of Mark Fritz's comments were ascribed to me and vice versa. That might be true, but we basically agreed on everything. So I'm not sure which of those things might be somewhat incorrect, but it seems close enough, if not completely accurate to me.
Yeah, I'm fine with those as well, Mark.
Okay, so those have been approved. And before we move on to the planning projects, let me just explain to people in the audience, in person or at home, how this works. The town introduces a project, and then the owners and or their design team describes the project. At that point, the ADR members can ask questions of them. Once the ADR members are done with that Q&A section after the presentation or even during it, then we open it up to the audience, and any audience member can have up to 3 minutes to comment on a project. And at the end of that, we bring it back to the ADR where we can make our recommendations to the town council. And the first item we have on the agenda tonight is 28 Walnut Avenue, which we have seen before. And so it would be great that when the design team is presenting it again, they could just really focus on the changes because we're all familiar with the basic design and what we saw last time. Thank you. And now I'll turn it over to you, Rebecca, for the town's presentation.
Thank you. I have a verbal presentation tonight since we did see it last month. I will note that the project is located at 28 Walnut Avenue. To note, the project tonight consists of demolition and design review. Last month, it also included an ADU. That ADU is now applied under the ministerial approval. So it is shown on the plans just so you can see it, but it is not under review tonight for ADR. There were some changes that were made. I'm going to have the project architect who is here tonight go into those instead of being repetitive. So please come forward, E.B. Bresic.
I think we're having trouble with the microphone. Mark, can you hear that?
No, I can't hear anything.
There we go. Okay.
Better? Okay, so Gabby and John couldn't be here tonight because they're at a funeral, but I'm here and my landscape consultant Deanne Budney is here to answer questions that relate to landscape, fencing, and that kind of stuff. So in the new application, we responded to the changes from the previous ADR meeting The concealing gate at the lower parking space was removed since the neighbor clarified at the last meeting that that was not what she asked for, and that removing the gate facilitates general usage per an ADR comment. The abandoned landscape water feature in the northwest corner has been removed. The original focus on simplified classic roof forms didn't take into account the big shoulder on the west neighbor. Therefore, the garage wing development has been divided into 3 volumes. The main ridge is now rotated 90 degrees, sloping away from the west neighbor. The roof area that's not over the garage has been divided into 2 pieces, a cross gable over the wing pulled back just over 2 feet. That wing now has its 1 clear-story window a little more than 24 feet away from the west neighbor's second floor, where 30 feet would be the standard side separation. There's a single pitch roof over the stair that slopes up, relating to the intermediate stair landing instead of to the second floor plate line, which repeats the shape of the single pitch roof that's over the upper east side at the entry on the other side of the property. These changes were instilled to reduce the mass of the garage roof, which you can see on the attached drawing. I did a 3D drawing for you because I felt that the proximity was an issue, but I felt more importantly that the volume of the roof with a big shoulder didn't need to be there, and that's why we addressed it from that part of the issue. The only other change that's worth talking about is there is a 1 west-facing window, which is at the permitted clear-story height, and as I say, approximately 24 feet away from the adjacent neighbor's second-floor window where the properties lap over. So we listened to and addressed as many of the comments from the previous ADR as we could. Here are some additional notes. On either side of 28 Walnut, the adjacent properties have their exterior social entertaining zone in the front. This property has its social entertaining space in the rear. That makes for good neighbor relations because the noise is not generated all the way in a row and the building blocks it, but our rear yard consists of approximately 20 horizontal feet of stone terraces stepping down the hill, with the remaining flat zone constrained by the existing 40-foot rear property line and the 15-foot side setbacks. As was explained to me by Rebecca, the Ross zoning code does not permit decks on grade nor paving in the rear setback. So the entire rear flat section that's paved now is legal nonconforming or illegal nonconforming, whichever. But it was our goal to reduce the impervious coverage, so we want to take that out. What you can look at is there is a proposed deck whose shape is kind of trapezoidal. It is defined by the 2 setback lines, and that's why we didn't move the development at the garage backwards, because we had no space for outdoor entertaining if we moved backwards. The passageway under the bridge is a small piece of human scale whimsy that breaks the front facade while maintaining the current path of water movement down the site, which we are all quite aware of since it poured since our last meeting. In the process of addressing the big shoulder, we looked more closely at our garage wing and the adjacent 30 Walnut house. Both sites slope from side to side as well as front to back. 30 Walnut has a garage with a second story above, forward and lower than its main house. 24 and 26 Walnut, that entire side of the street, also have 2-story garages with living space over the parking. So 2-story garages are in the architectural vocabulary of that end of Walnut. 30 Walnut's garage second story continues across the width of their house with another story above, and as the site descends, another story below at a different level from the garage. 28 Walnut, as proposed, also has a garage forward and lower than the main house with a second story. Its mass is now subdivided with different vertical planes and roof heights. Its upper level connects across the front to the main house, with the ADU imperceptible from the rest of the building except for its own entrance. That's to address the comment of ADU should be minimized as to its effect on the site. In fact, if you look at 30 Walnuts L-shaped footprint, basically 28 Walnuts L-shaped footprint is the uphill mirror image of the same structure. And if their living space above the garage was an ADU, it would literally be the same as ours. Although there is a ceremonial front door on the east wall about 2/3 of the way up the hill, most of the entry is at the lower level at the garage. So our design focus was to create architectural definition for what is the real front entry. To that end, we added a small vestibule at the lower level with its own roof. It has a place to hang coats and drop keys. The landscape paving was redesigned to create a generous landing both for people walking up the stone steps from the street and from the adjacent garage apron. The east-west stone path was pulled away from the house to give more privacy to the bedroom windows. In overview, 28 Walnut is an updated shingle cottage with front-facing gables and traditional roof forms. It has south-facing bracketed sunshades over grouped windows. Its color palette is gray and white. On your desk at the dais, if you want to look at it, it has the forms, colors, and materials of its immediate neighbors, which is why it's compatible and a good upgrade for the neighborhood. In passing, our neighbor at 30 Walnut, we had talked about, and I think I talked about at the last meeting, our comfortability with, I understand that we are allowed to have 7-foot side yard fences, solid. I think you might be allowed to have 6 feet with 2 feet of lattice on top as well. I'm not sure. But if the neighbors are interested in that, we would be more than willing to do that. We talked to both the Soles and the Thompsons about, in the field, adjusting both planting and fence solidity to give them what they asked for in terms of shielding them from views. I am available for questions.
Sorry. Thank you. Do any ADR members have any questions?
Sorry. Yes, I actually just have a procedural one. You've been speaking a lot about the ADU this evening. Is that even part of tonight's
No,
discussion?
what I wanted you to know is that we listened. I wanted you to know that you were adamant about your criticism last time, and we listened. And not only did we respond in reality when we didn't need to, but we also responded to those areas where we could not or would not change the building to know that we heard your comments and adjusted accordingly. No, it's not under discussion tonight.
Oh, okay, so, but if it's not in the discussion, but we're discussing it, it's in the same place, right?
It's
Same square footage, same spot?
It is a smaller than 800 square feet, so it reduced in size.
Okay.
There are 3 volumes over the garage. One is over the car part. The other 2 is split. One of those pulled back 2 feet. That's the area that's closest to the neighbor's bedroom window. In that area, that's the 24-foot place that I talked about. We pulled that back. So instead of being 7.5 feet, it's approximately 9.5 feet from the property line, where 15 would be normal and 4 feet is what is allowed for an ADU. So we are very close to the 30-foot that would be 15 to 15. At the same time, I should point out that the property on either side and the property that faces the front of ours, all of them have non-conforming setbacks in some ways. This part of Walnut Avenue was developed perhaps before zoning.
Right. Okay,
Right. Thank you for answering that question. So the ADU is not under discussion. So we should, thank you for explaining that to us, but now we should just discuss the rest of the project that is under our purview tonight. Could you put, for our benefit as we're having these questions or potential audience comments, just the front facade of the current plan? Thank you.
And actually, if I could ask if you could also alternate between the 3D perspective, which might help people understand the volume of it better. that was attached as part of the application. Rebecca, I don't know if it got in this or not. That's the one. Yeah.
Perspective. I have,
I'm still here.
okay, could you tell me what is the size of the deck and what the columns are fabricated from, the
Okay.
front deck?
So the deck, I believe, is 10 by, no, it's smaller than that. Hold on a minute. It's 6.5 feet by 11, 11 feet wide. The columns are tough. At this point, they're 6 by 6s. What I really want to do is wrap them with shingles. But because we're using fireproof composition shingles, you can't bevel the corners. And they're too small to put corner boards on. So I think they're going to be wood.
How far is that balcony from the side setback? From that property line?
Well, it's 15 feet to the corner of the building, and then it's another, I'd say, 7 or 8. I'm eyeballing it from here.
Okay.
And there was previously a 9.5 by 12 foot deck on the side of the house facing the Thompsons on the east side that we removed because it was in the side yard setback. And so we pulled it and an office back so that they would be compliant on that line.
If everyone's finished looking at this, could we return to the front facade, please? Thanks, Rebecca. Sorry for making you jump around so much.
Is this the sheet that you're,
I think they want the elevations, which would be, keep going, that one. Am I correct that you want elevations, you don't want the other perspective?
Yes.
Yeah, this one's good. And could you just, let's see, I just need to move something on my screen so I can see that better. Hold on. There we go. Okay.
So on these sheets, there are the existing, adjacent, or above, depending on how they fit on the page, to the proposed.
Okay, thank you. And just maybe keep that up unless someone wants to see something else during this discussion. Are there any other ADR questions before we open it up to the public?
Okay, I'm going to sit down.
Okay, if there's someone from the public who would like to speak about this project, not the ADU because that's not under consideration tonight, but any other part of the project, now is your chance to raise your hand, either in person or on Zoom.
I have someone on Zoom. Andrew, you can unmute yourself.
Good evening. Am I coming through okay?
Yes.
Great. Just a couple of things. I know from the discussion about the comments to the minutes that my colleague, my name is Andrew Bassick. I'm a partner at Hanson Bridget, and I represent Kate Lord, and she is the owner of 15 Walnut and 10 Olive, which are both directly to the south across Walnut from the project site. I know that you received my colleague Ellis Raskin's letter earlier today from the comments. I want to make sure that's made part of the record. From my client's point of view, it's really disappointing that with all of the feedback on massing last week, or I call it last meeting, excuse me, in the first submission, the applicants come back and has instead submitted, which is essentially the same design without any change in the location, and just instead of making changes to the design, is just change the permitting strategy. And now segmenting it as opposed to making material changes to the mass. There's no real change to the mass as it is viewed from Walnut. There's a little bit of sloping, the shoulder on the was the west side, but the south side, we still have, this dominating structure at the top of the hill. That's a problem. The deck that we were just talking about is actually going to be peering directly into my client's properties over the fence, into the kitchen, into a bedroom, and into the pool area. And that is a privacy issue from my client's point of view that needs to be resolved. The proposed conversion of the street level carriage house into a parking spot also is going to merit a lot of attention. Parking for whom, for what? There was some discussion about this being dedicated to the public last time. There are a number of problems for that if it's going to be used for, parking of, delivery trucks. That would direct the exhaust flow directly into my client's kitchen window. If they were to pull in there and be left idling, and that requires a ton more scrutiny. But that and there are a number of other more detailed design things that need to be design elements that need to be resigned here. But segmenting this and peeling off the ADU segment of this and trying to have that be under a separate process, the town code 1841-100 says that you all are supposed to look at all of this as a whole, and this particular strategy to increment the permitting gets away from looking at what is going to happen with the entire structure if it's allowed to go forward the way it should be. There are a ton of other things that we can get into in details. Many of them are listed in the letters we've submitted. I'm not going to spend your time tonight going over those again, but I just think that unfortunately the applicants put you in a position where the only appropriate course of action is to deny the application and send them back to the drawing board again to really make material changes to this plan, because they haven't done it. They were told they needed to do it, and they didn't respond. I know that the architect doesn't have a lot of experience in Ross and is finding her way in terms of what's acceptable and what's not, but this isn't going to cut the mustard. And so that the rest of that is all detailed in the two letters that you received today, both the one that's today's date and the one that we submitted in advance of the last meeting. But I just wanted to provide those comments on behalf of my client. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Andrew. Does anyone else have a hand up either on Zoom or in the audience?
I don't see anybody else on Zoom.
Okay. Several of the ADR, I believe everyone except for Stephen has already commented on this project originally. Stephen, would you like to go first and share your comments on this newer version of the project?
No, I'd like to hear everyone else's comments because they lent several last time, and I'd like to hear how successful you think the revisions have been.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks, Stephen. Mark, Joey, Laura?
I can go. It's kind of brief. I mean, I think really most of the concern was with the massing of the ADU. So I see you guys changed the roof and it's a little bit lower. And you took away the fence so that turnaround parking spot can actually be used. So that's good. I don't know if moving the ADU in 2 feet is going to make any significant impacts, but I see that a portion of one of the back areas was moved in 2 feet. So it doesn't feel like the comments were heard. It just feels like there was a way to work around it. So here we are. I don't really have anything else to add though to it.
And in regards to the non-ADU part of the project, such as the bridge, the front deck, do you have any comments on those architectural features?
I mean, the same I had last time about the bridge was just, I feel like it increases the bulk and the mass, but they've heard that, and so there's nothing really, I don't know.
Okay. Thank you, Laura. Mark, Joey, who'd like to go next?
I will.
Thanks, Joey.
So I'm just going back to my notes from the last meeting, and I feel similarly that basically you just took the ADU out of the application and changed it a little bit, and we're not allowed to comment on that based on regulations. But the total development still has a very enormous feeling. But we can't even comment on the left side of the development, but let's focus on the architecture of the right side, the main house. I'm still very adamantly against the bridge connecting buildings. Hello? I think they'd be more successful as separate buildings. Connecting them with that bridge just makes the entire development feel very monolithic. And if you did that, if you separated these basically two big houses, they would at least have some breathing room between them. And then by doing so, I would then treat the right side of this development as a separate home with fenestration that was proportional to the home. So if you took the bridge away and you then treated that home and looked at the windows and how they spoke with one another and the rhythm of them, I feel like the three top windows are very top heavy, and you might want to create some rhythm with the types of windows, the panes, for example, the big sliding window and the deck. They might want to echo a little bit of the detailing of the other windows. I feel like we generally don't allow second-story decks for privacy reasons, but it is quite far away from even the downhill neighbors. I could support that. I do feel that the columns need to be worked out so they're heavier in scale, and they feel like they are bearing, and they're not just these little, 6 by, somehow architecturally figure that out, where maybe there's a stone base on the house and the columns. I'm not sure, but to me they look a little spindly. So those are my architectural comments on the right side of this development. And again, we can't really say anything about the left side, but it's disappointing that it's almost as big as the right side. And that's all I have to say.
Right. Thanks, Joey. I would echo many of Joey's comments. And I would say that the overall, just looking at the things we're commenting on tonight, it does seem that the mass is still too large. I agree with what both of them said about the bridge and this. I never am a fan of second-story decks, and even less so when they face the street. And in this case, it doesn't seem like it's finished architecturally. It's almost impossible to recommend something where someone says, well, we have columns, but we're not sure what they're really going to look like in the end. But even if they were beautiful columns supporting that deck, I'd still be opposed to the deck because it's in the front, overlooking the street on the second story. And I just am almost always opposed to that. Those are my comments on the project. Mark, would you like to wrap it up for us?
Yeah, I can agree with the bulk and mass of the project overall. If we eliminated the bridge, I think that would help. When we focus on the right-hand side, when we look at the detailing or the massing, I would say, of that, of what is the right side of the project main facade, I would tend to agree. I think the deck is, number one, I would say unnecessary to some degree, but also if it was to remain, I think we need to look at the detailing of that in a more substantial way. The glass railing, I don't think fits in with the, I think that's what's proposed there. I don't think it fits in with the character of the home or the neighborhood. So I would, if that deck was to remain, I would strongly recommend a different treatment for the railing that was much more in keeping with the character of the home. I agree with Joey and Mark's comments about the structure of the deck in general. It would appear to be much more of a deck you'd find in the rear of a home that was added and not particularly well thought out. And I think that the same characterization of maybe these little shed roofs that are a part of the front facade, I recognize that it's pairing and mimicking on the left and the right. I think that's an element that could use a little more detail, perhaps, and might become a little more either. I'm not sure prominent is the right word, but I think it's not doing that facade much justice with the large 3-panel window or door below. Something about that construct, that whole piece that's sticking out on that particular facade isn't, I don't think, rendered well. It's not articulated well yet, and that encompasses that glass railing. So I think there's some work to be done on that particular facade. If we're able to comment on that, those details might carry over to what might happen on the ADU as well. But I think that there's more work to be done there as far as bringing the detail and the quality of that particular facade up for the overall design. So I guess my elements would be, I concur on the bridge. I think that just increases the bulk and mass of the overall project unnecessarily. Really, I understand its function, but I think it's somewhat unnecessary. And then I think really focusing in on that facade, I would eliminate the deck. I think I generally agree with Mark. Although I can see it is pretty far from the property line, it does have a view to across the canyon. But the detailing of that and the amount of glazing there just needs to be tweaked. It needs to be kind of worked out a little bit for me to support that.
Thanks, Mark. Stephen?
Yeah, I won't add too much, but I agree about the balcony, though. I think its position is supportable, given its where it is in the buildable area. If it were beautiful brackets that held up that thing, and there were wood pickets that were beautiful, and if the fenestration matched the character of the divided lights on the windows that were also on this facade, and they were French doors instead of 3, I think it would be great. I think the bridge is a little bit big in terms of massing, but I'll defer to the rest of the group on that. And that's all I have to add.
Thanks, Stephen.
I have one more comment, if I can
Oh, yeah, please, Joey.
add to mine. I did notice, or you had said you wanted to make more of a grand entrance or a front door that was noticeably the front door and the entrance. I feel like that narrow door with kind of, some probably 18 inches of shingles to the left of it, I feel like that whole element could be a more celebrated front door. It could even be wider. It could just be more of a gesture, like this is the front door, because we can't comment on the ADU, but they're the same in scale. And I would think that the main house would want kind of the grand front door, and maybe the ADU, even though we can't comment on it, could have the door around to the side or something where there was one big front door that was a grand hello. Just if it were my house.
Thanks, Joey. Okay, Rebecca, I think you probably have enough from us now.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So we're going to thank you all. We're going to move on now to 10 Southwood. And due to the proximity of my house, I need to be recused from this. So Joey, can you please take over the meeting for the 10 Southwood?
Yes. Okay. I'm the Luddite of the group that requests paper plans still, because I like to look at them during the meeting. Okay, here we go. All right, so we're starting out with 10 Southwood. And Rebecca, would you like to introduce it to us?
Yeah, I'm not sure if you have all met Alex. I think you have.
Oh, Alex, yes.
He will be presenting
Okay,
this project
great.
tonight.
Thank you.
Good evening, ADR members. The applicant at 10 Southwood Avenue is requesting approval of design review and a variance to allow construction of a new pergola-style carport in the side yard setback and relocate the existing driveway to the west side of the lot. The project proposes to demolish the existing carport between the main house and the cottage and relocate a new pergola-style carport in the side yard setback. The new carport will be painted to match the house trim, as well as have plantings which will help screen the carport. The project will also proposes to demolish the current driveway due to its narrow design that leads to the current carport. The project proposes to install a new driveway on the west side of the lot. The new driveway will be reduced to 65 feet. The project also includes a new fence in the front yard with an arbor, expanding the rear and front porch, and adding a new dormer to the existing cottage. New landscape and hardscape is proposed throughout the property. On June 21st, 2022, the applicant took the project to the ADR group for conceptual review, and the ADR group indicated that they could support the project going forward as long as the trees remain near where the carport is being placed, because the trees will provide screening. Staff requests that the ADR group discuss the merits of the project and provide a formal recommendation to Town Council. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. And would the applicant like to propose the project or present it to us? Or you?
Sure.
Yes.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry, there's a weird buzzing reverb. I apologize. And I don't know if I should I share screen and go through the whole project then? Is that okay? Great. So let me see if I can. I'm disabled to screen sharing.
I just made you a co-host, so you should be able to share now.
Okay. Great. There we go. Thank you so much, everyone. My name is Julie Johnson. I'm the architect of this project. My clients, Ron and Allison, are in the audience. The contractor, Chris Hessen, and Tasha, the landscape architect, are all on the call. As Alex mentioned, he did a great job, by the way. We had a July preliminary meeting where we lobbed the idea of demolishing the rear carport for the Abtas. They currently are remodeling their home from a permit issued January of 2022 with Chris Enrico Design Group. It's primarily an interiors project, and as that has evolved, they have, as these things go, noticed some other parts of their home that they would like to improve upon, namely that their current driveway on the east side of the property is about 9'3" clear, very tight, and the carport dates from a period unique to both the cottage and the main home, and basically renders their rear yard unusable. So we are proposing to demolish that and replace it with garden beds and put a one-car carport on the west side of the property. And there's a rear cottage that is also being renovated where we want to install a window and a dormer. There's also some kind of fencing and some different, slight deck modifications that were also proposed as part of this application. And we're happy to answer any questions, or I can tour through the project more. Just let me know.
Okay, does the ADR have any questions of designers? I think not. Does anyone in the audience have any comments or concerns that they would like to bring before us?
I don't see anybody on Zoom or the audience.
I do have a question. For that back patio space, how much larger is that versus the brick patio that's there now?
Let's see if I can get an example. Okay. I mean, it's about 6 feet, but I guess I didn't call it out. So it's 4 feet from here to that extra portion. So I would say it's about an additional maybe 8 feet in all. Kind of looking at this line, and it's 4 feet from here. So maybe 7 feet.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a question. Am I interpreting this properly that the guest house is going to be a different color, a light color with a dark trim, and the front house is that black forest green, which I compliment, I really like that. The black forest green with the white trim, so you're just doing the opposite for the back house?
That's correct. So this is it's called like a black forest green, exactly, for the main house, and then it's called distance gray for the exterior of the cottage with a darker trim. So they're inverse.
Okay, and then both trellises, the trellis at the front door was in the white as
That's
well
correct.
as the parking trellis?
Exactly right.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions? Any of the ADR members or anyone in the audience? Or should we go straight to our comments?
Joey, I do real quickly. If we could just talk a little bit about the protection for the trees that are out front that the driveway is kind of skirting around. I'm assuming an arborist has kind of examined the tree health and acknowledging that driving over the root structures will be fine long term, because you're obviously driving and paving underneath the drip edge, so that there are certainly root structures that are underneath, will be underneath that driveway. Can you talk a little bit about that?
I can speak to that. So we are going to mitigate some of that compaction with some root invigoration, which is what arborists recommend. Also, this is going to be a pervious surface, so we'll be very careful in terms of how we're going to excavate in that area. The trees will also be fenced during the whole period of construction. And primarily we'll be mitigating any kind of compaction with the root invigoration, with watering, and with mulch.
And you mentioned that the surface is impervious. I apologize. I can't see what the surface is. What is the driveway made of?
It's gravel.
It's gravel. Okay.
Yeah. Does that
Thank
answer
you.
your question?
Yeah. Thank you.
Any other ADR questions, or are we ready to give our opinions? Stephen, you want to go first?
I think overall this looks great, and I'm happy to support it. It seems that maybe the trellis needs a little bit of engineering. I can't imagine that the 2x6s are going to span 16 feet. I would also suggest that so that you mock up the trellis members, you get a sense of how they look, because it's hard to tell that kind of scale. And so both from a sagging and just kind of a visual standpoint, that you check it out and really like the size of the feeling of it, but that's easily doable. And then it really be milled to dimensions with crisp corners, I suggest, rather than doing a 2x6 has crummy curved corners, etc. So having nice wood for that makes a ton of difference. But overwhelmingly, I can support this project as it's submitted.
Thank you. Laura?
Yes, I also can support this project. I think, we kind of looked at it before, and moving the driveway to the other side and making it shorter makes sense. I guess for the trellis, I just wonder if the white color might make them stick out a bit much, but because I also like the color that you guys chose for your house. It looks great. And then, yeah, the changes to the guest house seem fine. So, yeah, I don't have any other comments.
I'll follow that up because we were thinking along the same lines. I'm all about paint color on this project. And I love the green of the house. I feel like the trellises in the white I feel like you kind of want to minimize those and make them go away, particularly the carport. You want that just to almost be like a garden feature as opposed to this bright white, grid. It also will be kind of a maintenance nightmare in terms of keeping that looking white and clean. I would urge you to think about making both trellises the nice green of the house, semi-gloss, and so they sort of go away a little bit. Maybe the front one at the door is white, but the parking trellis is a kind of an ancillary building or feature of the home. And then I actually do care about the color of the guest house. I don't know why they wouldn't just match, so they would kind of go away and blend, so that the back house didn't gain some dominance over the front house in that it would be so light. I feel like that you want that to be the secondary house. So I have no problem with the development. It's more just the actual paint colors. Okay, that's it.
Yeah, I can support this project as designed. I would agree with Joey on the paint scheme. I would probably leave the trellis at the front door. I could support that being white, given that's, as an attracting visual to bring you into that space. I think that makes sense. And then agreeing that the carport trellis might just fade away if it's a darker green. It's a pretty dark green. I know that the other two members of the ADR really were excited about that. I personally think, given the location of the home and the amount of foliage and coverage and shade, I would personally lean towards a lighter shade, but that is just a personal opinion, because it does get very dark back in that section of Southwood. So, if it were my home, I would bring up the tone a couple of levels on the main home, just to provide a little more relief because of the amount of shade that lot sees. Otherwise, I think it's a pretty successful project, so I can support it.
So I think that's all of us. And to summarize, I don't think anyone has any problem with the actual development and what you're doing. It's great. And the paint colors, I don't know if that's even enforceable. It's our opinions. But
I think I heard paint colors from 3 ADR members.
so I think there is a bit of a resounding make the carport very well built and go away, not white.
Can I speak to the colors of the trellises?
Sure.
Just as a landscape designer, we're going to be planting wisteria on them. So there'll be vines growing up them. They're really going to become part of the landscape. And that's really why we chose the trellis kind of format for the carport, is so that it will become more like part of the garden. So I think once the vines grow up, you really won't see this stark brightness of color. It'll really become part of the landscape.
That'll be really pretty. I still would stand by the carport being darker, but I think at the front door, that'll be really pretty with the white.
I would reinforce one of Joey's earlier comments from a maintenance perspective. Once you start getting the wisteria up on a white trellis at the carport side specifically, it'll be next to impossible to maintain that paint. So it could over time degrade. The paint of that trellis could degrade and start to look awfully weathered, and the white highlights that to some degree. So I think that, just thinking forward, I love the idea of it blending into the landscape. I think making it a dark color will help facilitate that as it sort of blends into that darker background, just to add on to what you guys are saying. And one more thing I would say to Stephen's comment, I apologize to add this, but I think not only do the you have 2x10s and 2x6s at that carport side, but the 6x6 posts may be a little bit spindly in relationship to those sizes. That may be visually more pleasing as an 8x8. Just again, I think when you mock it up, if you wrap a 6x6, then it starts to get more substantial in size. But the 6x6 with a 2x10, you may think that's a little spindly, I guess would be my comment there. But that's up to you guys how you want to look at that.
I would support a beefier column on that carport with some sort of.
Yeah. Yeah, the home's substantial, and I think it could support a substantial carport. Even if you want it to fade in the background, you don't want it to be too spindly.
Great. Well, thank you so much. I think those are terrific comments. I've got them written down, and I'll talk to the homeowner about going with like darker trellis, so it just kind of blends as a shadow, if you will. And yeah, I appreciate all the feedback. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Rebecca, we're clear on all the comments. Oh, you're
Thank you.
welcome. Thanks for coming.
Julie, if you could stop sharing, that'd be great.
Oh, you don't want me to see my desktop anymore?
Well, maybe.
Well, this would be, sorry, embarrassing. Well, why don't I just log off? Okay, then.
Okay, is everyone there?
Yes.
Yeah, we're still here, Mark.
Okay, great. Sorry, my screen did a weird thing then. Great. So now we'll move on to 41 Poplar Avenue, a new project, and I will let Rebecca introduce it.
I'll introduce it.
Oh, thank you, Alex.
Yeah. Okay. The applicant today is requesting approval for design review and a variance for the property located at 41 Poplar Avenue. The property is located within the FEMA special flood zone, and the project proposes to lift the existing two-story single-family residence 3 feet and 8 inches above its existing elevation and its current location in order to raise the habitable space out of the floodplain. The project also includes expanding the two-story deck and removing the existing stairs. A new porch is being proposed below the new deck, which will encroach into the side yard setback, requiring a variance. The project also includes interior work, new windows, and updates to the front entry stairs with the new handrail. Staff requests that the ADR group discusses the merits of the project and provide a formal recommendation to the town council. And thank you, that's it.
Thank you. Do the owners and their design team wish to make a presentation at this point?
Yes, we have the applicant here.
Great.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Rebecca, do you have that condensed package? I think is the one. And I don't know if pointing helps, but I'll point from here. So first I'll describe the basics of the project and then sort of make our argument for hardship. The basics is a pretty simple extrusion of the existing volume. It's a relatively simple floor plan, and we're going up 3.8 or 3'8" with a 1'10" lift of the floor plane and a 1'10" raise of the 7-foot interior first floor height. The majority of the project is a by rights as we see it, a by rights lift, and we're staying under lot coverage. There is a minor, super minor, I don't know if you can see it on this side here, right under that area right there on the existing, there's a little like 1 foot overhang. And here, we're just closing that up. It's actually quite minor from the interior floor plan, but that's why you'll see our FAR is changing when we're already over our allowable FAR. It's mainly just a rectification of a line that already exists on the top floor down. And so it adds a few square feet to the volume. That I assume is also under the aegis of the variance as well. I think the main piece at issue is going to be our encroachment into the 15-foot side setback. It's not rendering so much on the projector here, but it's a 50-foot wide lot, and this plan here on A101 will show sort of the setback. Because it's a 50-foot wide lot, it's got two 15-foot setbacks, and therefore it's only got a 20-foot sort of strip down the middle that's legally buildable. Before I get into an argument, I guess I'll keep going with the design. It's going to be the same materials, same colors, largely the same window layout as viewed from the street, just with a larger first floor volume and a taller garage. None of the massing from the street is moving except for 3'8" straight up. I do want to make a really important, as I see it, but maybe academic distinction, which is I saw that the ADR minutes today said that we were bringing it into FEMA compliance. We are lifting it above the FEMA floodplain. We are doing paperless drywall. We are doing separated moisture resistant detailing, but the FEMA standard also calls for outlets to be lifted up to 4 feet. And we're not going to do that because it's all arc fault interrupted, and we thought that would make it feel like a strange utility space. So I don't want to invoke a standard of scrutiny that we're not required to do, but we are in the spirit of the FEMA protections. So onto the deck. The side setbacks are, as we see it, somewhat onerous. We're looking at 60% of the lot immediately being rendered unbuildable. We're extending existing encroachments into the setback, not increasing existing encroachments. The character of the neighborhood, Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind going to the second to last page. The character, that one, yeah, that one, right, yeah. The character of the neighborhood is very urban, and the zoning does not seem to honor that or address that. Not a single property on Poplar Avenue that is residential, at least on that side of the road, honors that 15-foot setback. And you can see ours is actually probably the least developed lot along that corridor. The southerly neighbors who are the most impacted with this secondary structure here are, I think, 3 feet off of the existing setback. And they would be the most impacted, and we've reached out to them. They've stood on the deck, and we have their support that they are willing to provide and document. And the main reason why we're doing this, the main rationale, is that the house has flooded twice in the last 16 months. And I'd really love to build them something that isn't rebuilding. I've had a long relationship with the owners. This is, I think, our 5th project with them overall. And so their house is something we care for in our portfolio, and it's been hard to go in and tear our work out and then put it back. So we'd really like to get it up above the floodplain. The deck was sort of our way of connecting the backyard, which is very much right now sort of carte blanche. It's a very flat, grassy area, and this was a way of blending those two and actually inhabiting that without the sort of stark wall. The architecture is somewhat a stark box, and this was a way of blending into the landscape, stepping down into it. Rebecca, if you wouldn't mind going back to A142. Yeah, actually that one right there, the last one. No, sorry, I'm wrong, A143. Yeah, thank you. This is not in your provided plans because I just marked this up for the meeting, but this little square right there, I'm sorry, my hand is shaking. I'll go up. setback or existing. You can see the existing outline of the deck there in red, and the shaded area is the new. I believe that's it. Thank you.
I have a quick question on something you said earlier about the elevation gain.
Yes.
I'm sorry, you mentioned the 3 feet 8 inches, and then you sort of separated it into a 2 foot and a 1
Yes.
foot or something like that. Could you explain that further?
So the existing first floor has a 7-foot ceiling height. We're lifting that to 8'10", and we're lifting the floor height 1'10". That will get us, I believe right now we're only like 3 or 4 inches below the floodplain. So that will get us more than 1 foot above the BFE and allow us to get a more livable, gracious height.
Okay, so 1 foot and 10 inches of the raise is for flood.
And 1'10" is for habitability, yeah.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to be clear on that.
While you're there, can I ask another question? So what is the clear proposed head height inside both levels?
8'10".
8'10".
8'10", yeah.
And then you mentioned water-resistant drywall and other measures, but you are building the finished floor of the first floor 1 foot above the 100-year
Yes,
datum.
yes.
So the water-resistant drywall and that stuff is voluntary on top of that
Absolutely.
precaution?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, cool.
They've kind of once bitten,
Had it with
or
that.
twice bitten, twice shy.
Yeah. Got it. Thank you.
And one more question from me, just the detail, can you speak to the detail of what the connection to the ground will be? Is there a stone base, or are you going to just resheathe and stucco, I think, down
Sure,
to the...
it's a stucco building, and we're going to do an elevated slab to keep it water impermeable. And the detail is to take there's a rounded crown that exists, you can see right in that photo above the second-story windows, and to use that as a quarter round at the base, almost mirroring that below. You can see it along that line there. That sort of mirrors the line of the parapet and allows us to have a fully supported wall on the slab, but then bounce out proud. So it will be stucco down to the ground the same as it is now, just with that quarter round detail repeated and mirrored from the top.
Got it, thank you.
We're very much taking our cues from what's there, as this is, right downtown and, part of the neighborhood character for sure.
When it flooded before,
I think it's 38, yeah.
sorry.
Yeah.
When it flooded previously, about how deep did the flood go in the house?
Mike, Indy, do you guys want to talk about that?
The recent floods have been just, it comes from like the sump pump just not being able to evacuate enough. I mean, back in 2004, whenever the whole town flooded, I think it was 2 or 3 feet or whatever. I don't know the exact amount, but whatever that was. But more recently, it's been 3 or 4 places in the house that gets like a ½ inch of water, enough that you can't, you just can't keep it out, and it's enough that it gets the drywall wet. They have to rip it out. So
I'm sort of curious. Can you stay at the microphone for just 1 second?
sure.
Okay. So if it flooded, and we've had some, luckily we haven't had floods in the last few years. And I'm just curious, if it flooded up to 3 feet before, what's the rationale you have for not wanting to raise sort of the first floor, ground floor, as high as possible in this process and not worry about the ceiling height at all? Is that just like an insurance requirement that if you get up to that 1 foot 10 inches extra, yeah, you might flood, but the insurance will be a lot cheaper because of it?
I'm gonna let Eric answer.
I think that's really kind of an actuarial negotiation. The base flood elevation isn't some magic number that we hit it and we'll never flood. And it's really just a risk assessment and value. If they're going to invest quite a lot to lift it, we felt that more than 1 foot above the statistical average was sort of reasonable. It's kind of like, why don't we build all of our buildings to
I think
survive
Mark
an
is asking,
8.0?
why not go higher?
Yeah, I get it. I mean, it's the same reason we're not building the whole thing out of shear wall. It's because there is a risk, and it's not financially viable to assess the extreme ends of that risk. 2005 is something that we have insurance for, but it's not something that we necessarily, it's not the design standard we build to. We design to the base flood elevation.
Okay. Thanks. Are there any other ADR questions for the design team?
I'm sorry, is there any landscaping? You were talking about like connecting the house to the yard more.
Yeah,
with the
that
decking and
should
stuff.
be
But
on the site plan. It's, at this point, it's sort of introductory. It's more of, you want to go 2 down to 143, you'll be able to see it from the rear. Yeah, that 3D axo might be the best way to see it. And if not, then the site plan has a little bit. Yeah, that one cuts it off. Why don't we go to the site plan on, I think it's 102? Yeah. Yeah, if you zoom in on the right-hand proposed site plan there. And you can see it's largely bare in the back, but that's because it's largely a grass plain attached to the creek. But the existing patio there, we're keeping most of it, but trying to soften it with the pathways, and then do a lot of planting around the mass of the deck.
Okay. And then is there any additional screening? So the neighbor you were talking about on the south that is
Yes.
supportive, but also the most impacted. Is there
Absolutely.
any additional screening? I saw there were some big bushes that kind of like dipped down some. So I just
There are, and so there's 2 modes of screening. One is the physical, that the deck on the right side has a physical window and wall to it. It's not an open porch to them. Up above, obviously, that's more of a concern, and I'm hearing that you guys have concerns about second-story decks, so that might be of concern. But I believe you guys met with the neighbors. They stood on the decks and all agreed that we would plant taller reaching hedges and nurture the hedges that we have, and that everybody's comfortable with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other ADR questions? Okay, I'll open it up to the public for any comments, either people in person or on Zoom. Okay, then I'll bring it back to the ADR for recommendations. When my fellow members make their recommendations, I'm curious to hear your opinions on sort of the applicant described the project as it exists as, I think, boxy was the term. So I'm curious as to your perceptions on the extra height and thinking of the non-flood related height, not the 1 foot 10 inches, but the extra that will make a nicer interior roof and how that would affect it from the outside, if at all. And then also, of course, the front stairs, which are something that was brought to our attention. Who would like to go first?
I can go first, Mark.
Thanks, Stephen.
I can support the project as designed, wholly. If you want to talk particularly, Mark, if you want me to answer the question about height, I was going to even suggest flexibility for 6 inches more of height if you wish to take it. I know you're trying to match the floor heights from bottom. I think the additional height is contextually appropriate, looks fine for the style of architecture that is this house, the 1930s house. And I think given the kind of cheek to jowl nature of the block and the fact that a lot of these houses are going to have to do this in order to take advantage of their lower levels. They're going to have to lift out of the FEMA floodplain. And so, for a while we might see ones that are taller than others, but eventually they're going to all have to go up there. But I think that the height is fine from an even, kind of from just an architectural critique standpoint. I think that the variance request for the deck at both levels, the occupiable portion of the deck that's at the ground floor and the occupiable terrace at the upper story, I can support that because of the context of all of the neighbors along there. Everything is really tight. All of the 15-foot setback should probably be amended with a new zone that is applicable to that and Bolinas that have 7.5-foot setbacks, I imagine. But, so I don't think the 15-foot is practical or really relates to the site at all. It's nice that they've gotten the neighbors' support for it. I think that the design of the terrace in terms of the solidness of the sides is really smart. I really like it. I think it's really well done. I think it's going to be rad. And I think it's going to provide a little bit of cozy kind of privacy for the thing you use the most, which is the downstairs one. And so that will kind of reflect your own noise back to you. And I think that is a nice way to treat this really kind of cozy relationship between your neighbors. It's a little bit exposed at the top. There's no hard and fast rule that second-story balconies aren't allowed, and I think it's totally appropriate in this context. I would wish to see like a little planter along that top side, but I know you're not moving that set of French doors, but if you find that you are moving that set of French doors, it'd be cool to put in like a little planter along that side so you have a little bit of privacy for yourself, you know, just visually. That's all.
Thanks, Stephen. Who would like to go next?
I can support this project as designed with a few, also with a few comments. I feel like you might as well raise it a little more if you're going for it. You're spending all this money, like really get it out of the floodplain, and you want those high ceilings or higher ceilings. So I can support that if the detailing then is proportionate to the new height of the building. I feel like by leaving the fenestration as is with the smaller windows, they all of a sudden are becoming out of scale with the new height of the building. For example, on the front facade, you have that really nice big bay window. I just think I saw one of you in it this evening. Pardon me? No, I think I might have scared one of the little girls or something. I was going on the side. But there's the nice big bay window, and then by jacking up the house, the little window below it all of a sudden kind of looks too small in that facade. So I think if you are going to raise the house, you might think of making the windows a little taller. The existing windows, maybe their sill height is lower, so they just, there's more window and less stucco. Is that a new window? No, it says 6. Right. Oh, sorry. I'm just saying, great, raise the house, even go a little more. But if you're going to do it, I think the proportion now is there's a lot more stucco and the same size windows.
Yeah, it's
so I would
salient point.
relook at the proportion of the windows. And normally we don't support second-story decks. I thought I could make a finding in that it was a second means of egress, but you took away the stair down to the yard, which would have been a nice connection with the primary bedroom there, but I know that's then lot coverage that we would have to deal with. I actually think it would just be nicer to have another way to get down to the yard, just from the inhabitants' use, and it would give me a reason to support it as a second means of egress from the top floor.
One thing that occurred to me as we were designing, and that may also provide some insight on why 1'10" as well, and not why 3 foot and 8 inches, is also because the stairs have gotten
too big, too much.
Big. And if we are to go any further, they're going to extend out past the front of the building or need to turn. So this is sort of shoehorned into something that could work without extending that mass.
That makes sense.
We certainly could explore other options on the stairs if more height was necessary.
I thought of that too. So those are my two main comments. I would make the windows bigger in proportion to the new height, and give a second means of egress on that deck, and then I could support it.
Thank you, Joey. Laura, Mark, who would like to go next?
I can go.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think I don't really have a comment on the height. I think the height works at the proposed height. Again, if the If the applicant was to go a little higher, that's probably fine as well, but I think I can support it with the proposed height it is today. I am thinking about Joey's comment in relationship to the front facade and the windows. It's interesting. I think you could increase the scale of some of those windows, but I might recommend dropping the head height of the garage door. I think in this particular case that is staying, and now is sort of an extended volume or extended opening. You might, as you look at that front facade, that may want to come down in relationship to the facade, and the other windows increase in scale. But again, the drawings that I have are pretty small, so I'm struggling to see if that's the right recommendation. But keeping the garage door as a taller element may not be the best bet on that front facade. I think I might rather see that shrink a little bit, and then some of the other windows, as Joey suggested, increase their sill height maybe, or lower their sill height. So I think I would just recommend looking at those proportions a little bit, thinking about the garage door and thinking about those other windows. With respect to the second floor deck, I struggle with that a little bit. I recognize that the neighbors are supportive of that, and I also recognize Stephen's comments that sure, we should have a potentially different side yard setback. I can't see a finding for increasing the second floor deck in the side yard setback. I just struggle to understand that is a necessity. I wouldn't say it's a bad design, but I would say I would support that design if it was truly 15 plus feet away from the neighbors. Neighbors turn over time and time again over the course of time. And I think we try hard to preserve people's privacy. And in that particular respect, I would struggle to see you getting vegetation up high enough to be able to really screen and to provide that kind of privacy with the deck being that close to the side yard. So I like the ground floor patio. I think that's a nice transition into the backyard. I can support that. But I struggle to support the second floor deck expansion in the side yard setback as an exacerbation of an existing nonconformity. In general, that's hard to support without some particular reason that I'm not aware of for this project. So I would say everything I could support on the project with the exception of the second floor deck in the side yard setback, I would say.
Thanks, Mark. Laura, would you like to go?
Sure, I am supportive of the increase in height. I actually don't, I think that the second story decking is, I would support that because it's already there. So I don't think taking away the staircase changes the use of it that much. And it's facing the creek. There's not, on the north side, the shrubs are very large, and it doesn't seem like that would impact privacy. So I would just consider adding some larger screening, or like you said, trying to encourage, figuring out how to get the ones to fill in that bare patch. So I'm actually supportive of the balcony. And I don't think I had anything else. So thanks.
Thanks, Laura. So for me, I support the project overall. I agree with Stephen that even if the applicant wanted to raise the ground floor level slightly more, I think that would be fine. And I do think the other homes around the neighborhood will be doing the same thing at some point. I don't like the second story deck expansion because, as Mark said, it's the exacerbating existing nonconformity. I do agree with what Stephen says that probably this area is zoned incorrectly and the setback should not be the same here or Bolinas relative to other places where the houses are spread apart much more. However, it is what it is at the moment, and neighbors do change over time. So I would say the ground floor deck is fine with what they propose, but the second story deck shouldn't exacerbate the nonconformity. And that's all my comments. Thank you. Rebecca, I assume you have enough there?
Yes, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Okay, and now we will move on to 34 Poplar Avenue. and we will let the town, I'm not sure if it's Alex or Rebecca, will introduce it, and then the applicant can add on.
Okay. It's me again.
Thanks, Alex.
The applicant at 34 Poplar Avenue is requesting approval to construct a new ADU over the existing garage and patio. The project proposes to construct a new 710 square foot ADU over the existing garage and patio. The ADU and the main house are not connected. However, the new ADU will be connected to the main house by an entryway. The new ADU will have a balcony with metal guardrails and 6 skylights matching the design of the primary house. Due to the location of the ADU, it does not meet the 4-foot side yard setback, therefore requiring an ADU permit. On July 11th, 2022, the applicant took the project to the ADR group for conceptual review. The ADR group indicated that they would like to see the mass and bulk of the project pulled back, which is reflected in the plans before you tonight, and that the 2-story is appropriate for a home in downtown. At the time of writing the staff report, no public comments were received. However, staff did receive an email from a neighbor regarding the 2-story structure. The email indicated that the 2-story structure is not appropriate on Redwood Drive. Staff requests that the ADR group discuss the merits of the project and provide a formal recommendation to the town council. Thank you.
Thanks, Alex. Would the design team like to make a presentation at this point, or the owner?
Thank you, Alex. My name is Tristan Warren. I am the architect for this project, and I will be presenting the changes or modifications we made to the project since we spoke in July. Basically trying to incorporate recommendations from the ADRB at that time. I think they were well taken by myself and the clients, and it's all in the execution, right? It's a challenge. It's a challenging lot. It's a small lot. We have not a lot of space to work with. At the time of our presentation, can we go to the slide when you get a chance? Thanks. When we brought this to the ADR in July, we talked a lot about how it was sited and where it was sited, because it's a unique siting. The lot is 100 feet by 50 feet. So again, like the last project, we're dealing with a small parcel. The main outdoor spaces that we have were landscaped in 2020 in a previous permit. It's a yard. It's in the southwest corner. On the south side of that property, 19 Redwood is basically on the property line. So again, like the other parcel on Poplar, we're living in a very tight community that was built before, the current setbacks have been in place. So we're dealing with a context that's not conforming in any way, shape, or form to sort of what the ordinances are. Because of this, we looked at, well, what's the most appropriate place to put an ADU? We have a 3.5-foot flood, base flood elevation for first floor because of the 20-foot or 19.5-foot lot height and a 21.8-foot base flood elevation. This lifts us up so that we would be starting at 3.5 feet plus for our finished floor. I know the new ADU ordinances that just went into effect would allow us to make a rather massive building in that backyard space. And my client and I don't believe that is beneficial to anyone, not my clients who lose their backyard space, nor the neighbors. So ultimately, this brought us to the decision of, well, where can we put this? And we have a 19-foot long, plus or minus by 12-foot wide garage, a patio space, and then the existing house. And the idea was, well, why don't we bridge this across from the house, enter on the house deck? There was a prerequisite in the program for my clients to have access from the house because this may be used as an in-law unit and not just as a rentable ADU, which I think is a perfectly appropriate use given, the intent of the law when the ADU ordinance was first put into place about 18, 19 years ago. Wonderful. That's okay. We work through these things. I was just thinking about how that was one benefit of being on Zoom. It was a little bit easier to coordinate these things. So if we could just go to slide 1.4, or sheet 1.4. That's the same 3D view we were looking at, but it's a little bit cleaned up. So that one right there. So this is, I wanted to just talk about sort of the context of what we did and how we addressed the ADRB's comments from before. So actually, could you go to the last slide? I think we'll start there. Very last slide. So the very last slide is, I believe, the 3D from what we presented before. Yes, it is. And if we could just zoom in on that middle one on the left, please. It's basically the same view. Perfect. So what we came up with before was basically a 18-foot wide by basically 40-foot long ADU that bridged from the front of the garage back to the house and was basically a rectangle that sat on top of the garage. It spanned that outdoor, now covered outdoor living space, and then butted into the house with a little step down for where the entry was that matched the existing roof plane. The comments and feedback we got from the ADRB were basically that you all felt that the location was great. It was the right place to put it up against the commercial building. It was the right place to keep it away from the residential buildings to the south, but that the mass was a challenge, both from the way it related to the existing house and from the way that it related to the street. And so your comments were to basically make it, reduce it. Now, this is an 800 square foot ADU. There's not a lot of fat we can cut before we really start to cut into the functionality of the living space. If we could go back to that 1.4, that would be great. Thank you, Rebecca. One comment, and I might have been Mark or it might have been Stephen, I can't remember, from last summer was, well, let's look at how it relates to the front of the garage, and could we pull it back, and could we look at the street wall of the existing Redwood Ave, and that, this isn't a standard backyard situation since this is a street to street lot, and how can we address what is really the front of the ADU but abutting Redwood Ave, and how do we handle that? And comments were basically, or advice was basically, we'll look at maybe a standard 25-foot setback, look at the context of Redwood. And so what we did was we ended up pulling that front of that building back by about 3 foot 8 feet, and I can already hear the deck comments from you all out there on the design review board. I appreciate that that is a flat plane, and we had purposed it as a deck. I think we're willing to negotiate about that, but having it moved or set back, that massing just that small amount, makes it challenging to put a roof form on there that's going to be, one, believable, two, doesn't interrupt the windows on that front facade, and three, is gracious architecturally. And I feel that the step back, especially when we view this from the street, maybe we could slip down to the yes, that one right there. That flat plane really does help with the architecture on this, and stepping it back. Other adjustments we made were we carved away, can we go back, sorry, can we go back up to the one above? We carved away at the entryway, right about where the cursor is. We stepped that building back to the same plane, so we tried to reduce and open up the area around the deck and where those doors are in the house, and reduce the mass of the ADU in that area to, again, mitigate some of the questions we had about that large rectangular mass on the upper level. The third thing we did to sort of help break down the mass of the building was to change the materials of the sort of front block, and use a sort of cedar, probably just clear sealed, something that was a little darker. The house is white, the garage was white, and I think that we want to keep the primary context of the white within that. That's perfect right there. But by switching the materials, especially to a darker material that's going to blend in a little bit, we felt that that might help reduce the visibility and the apparent mass of the building. We also then did carve away on the left-hand side of this facade by having floor-to-ceiling glass, where we would have a door out to the deck. Again, designed to sort of break down the apparent mass from the street, where we're still trying to gain square footage. Briefly, if we could go to slide 1.6, please. I just want to talk a little bit more about the street context. And so we did take a look at the front setbacks and the sort of architectural vocabulary on Redwood Drive as part of this. And, you know, it's a mixed street. There are a couple of single-story houses. There are 2 very large Victorian houses, number 8 and I believe number 14, or number 16 actually. Then number 27, which is on the same side of the street, is a shingle-style 2-story house, which is sitting quite close to the street. So we did a little math, we looked at it, and you know, the average setbacks are close to where the front of the ADU would be on this on our side of the street. There is precedent in at least 3 or 4 buildings that do have actual second stories in the sort of immediate neighborhood context from Brookwood Lane over to where the building this Redwood Drive turns to go back to Ross Common. And so I'm reasonably confident that we're fitting in with the street vocabulary with the proposed ADU. Again, that commercial building at 32 Poplar is sort of a wild card in the whole equation. It's set back from the street, but it's still a very massive building. And I think that the scale of that building, you know, with the ADU adjacent to it, can we go to 1.5, please? One back, please. Thanks, Rebecca. You can see it's ghosted in, but you can see that, you know, that's a good view right there, that while our presentation to the street is larger than the garage, I don't think it's larger than or taller than 27 Redwood's presentation to the street. And even though that facade that we're showing on the second floor is almost 15 feet or 18 feet in front of the commercial building, it still presents at the same mass in this image. We've also, just for context, we have ghosted in the trees as best we could with, you know, Photoshop to match what's actually out there in context. And that, you know, mature street trees on that block are really going to knock down the mass of any second story building as well. So we have, I think the whole context of the street has to be taken into consideration when we view this building. We can't just look at this building and say, well, it's bigger than it was, it's an ADU and it's up front. We spent a lot of time looking and trying to conform to the context. And I think that's all I have to say, unless you all have, I'm assuming you'll have questions, but those two, that speaks to the 2 comments that we got out of the last conceptual design meeting in July. Yeah.
The Redwood side of the lot is the back property line, correct?
It is the back property line.
Okay.
And so I can't remember if it was Stephen or Mark or one of the Marks who had sort of alluded to the fact that, yes, it's the back side of the property, but because it's a street to street lot, the context is different than if it was a bounded backyard and there was another backyard or the creek behind it. The context is really what's going on Redwood Drive. And when we go, I know you've been out there, Joey. When I go out there, I don't think of it as the back. I think of this as the front facade to the back of the lot. And that's how I'm trying to, you know, that's how I'm trying to approach it as a designer, because it's a different it's a different animal than if it's just the backyard.
Right. I wanted to make clear that in your next door neighbor, that is their front property line.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. You know, the only building that really backs onto Redwood Drive is that commercial building that's adjacent to us. And it truly backs onto it. It's a podium structure, ribbon windows, you know, large bulking mass. And, you know, the only reason it's not really noticeable along there is street trees. I have a photo that I didn't include in this that we took when those poplar trees or whatever the trees are in front of it didn't have leaves on it, and you know it's very visible.
One quick question. I'm sorry because I can't see it because of the font on my screen. How far is the proposed ADU from the side yard, from the property line?
From the property line, it's 2.5 feet. I think it's 2 feet 5 inches. We had it surveyed, and so yes, it is. But it's no closer than the existing residence.
So it's basically 2.5 feet instead of the 4 feet that's
and that's working with
code, the current code.
Sorry, Mark. That's working within the existing context of the built form on the lot. If we could have moved it over 4 feet without, you know, sort of severely challenging sort of both design and, you know, structural continuity, we would have.
Right, of course, right. Yeah, no, understood. And how far back is the front of the garage from the property line?
Front of the garage is 19 feet. The front of the ADU is 22 feet 9. On this side of the street, I by a survey myself, so it's not a hard and bound survey. The average street wall is about 22.5 feet. So we're contextually within the street wall, if not the letter of the 25-foot setback there. This is where I don't know how relevant it is because obviously this is an ADU, that's our back property line. So technically it could be 4 feet from the back property line.
Right, yeah, no, I was just asking about the garage part. Okay, thanks. Do any other ADR members have questions of the design team?
Just real quick one. It does appear, and I think I saw this on site, that the garage is a current width now, and I can't really read that on my drawings, but
We did widen it, Mark. And,
it is wider, right? By 2 feet or so?
We did widen it, and again, I mean, I think as Eric spoke to in the last project, that was more of an architectural consideration. We're not, you know, it's always nice to capture additional square feet, but really the idea of having something to get the width, because we're doing a single long building, to get the width for circulation and then have habitable spaces like a bedroom, you can't have a 12-foot wide, I guess you could have a 12-foot wide building, but at the end of the day, when you take your walls and everything like that, you're left with an 8-foot wide bedroom. So we wanted to widen this building to a proportional room size that's comfortable for the bedroom and allow for a 3-foot wide or slightly larger corridor on the side. We then brought the wall straight down. I mean, we could have jogged it back to conform, but architecturally, it seemed more appropriate to bring the wall down.
So you're just adding you're adding square footage to the garage essentially on the downside.
We're adding 60 square feet plus or minus to the garage. You know, I don't know how to attribute this. I don't know how to account for this. It's sort of accounting, right? Because we're at 710 feet for our ADU. So yeah, the 60 feet isn't there, but yet we're not on our allowance. I don't know how to do this and do architecture, right? I mean, it's sort of at a certain point, I'm getting stymied by the numbers if I follow the numbers because I want to do architecture that looks good, that is appropriate. And if I'm cutting back the side of the building at the bottom of the floor to conform to the regulations there, it just doesn't look good. I mean, I'm happy to have this discussion, but that's why we did it.
Can I ask,
Yeah.
I couldn't read it in the PDF that was sent, it was blurry. So like in terms of FAR, there's a slight.
FAR, all of these lots are over FAR. And again, my goal is not to increase the ADR. I'd be happy to attribute those 60 square feet to the ADU. It's not contiguous with the ADU, so again, I don't know how to account for it. But we, the FAR in Ross is 20% of lot coverage, carte blanche. Doesn't matter if you've got 2 acres on Upper Road or you've got,
Right. Actually, it does vary slightly on some different lots, but that doesn't really matter for the sake of this conversation.
Okay, I was just trying to answer the question. I don't know, this is one of those sticking points. I don't know the answer. I don't know how to solve it. I just know that if we looked at that, the architecture would not, the architecture would be compromised. So,
well, I guess one solution would be just to shorten the garage as you widen it. Then you'd keep the same exact square footage in the garage and wouldn't increase the FAR.
Right, and I understand that, Mark. I mean, but I guess the question is, when does it stop being a garage in that sense? Because we only really have, I think, just over 19 square feet, or 19 linear feet in there. Maybe we've got a little bit more, and we could pull it back. But again, I think I was trying to make sure we could park a car in there.
It's 19 feet deep at the moment.
I think it's a bit more than 19 feet deep. Can we go to the floor plans, A2.0?
25.
There, top one there. Whoop, down a little bit more. That's existing. I want to go to the proposed. So zoom in there on that upper plan. Yeah. So that dotted line, if I'm remembering correctly, is a 20 by 10 foot parking space right there. Now,
I think it has it above. There you go. It's 21 feet 9 3/4 inches to the exterior walls.
Out to out, yeah. So, I mean, by the time we get inside, we've got a 20 foot by 10 foot parking space. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I could bring it back maybe a foot and do a 19 by 10 parking space and still have it conforming. If that makes sense, it's not gonna pay all of those 60 square feet, but it would reduce it somewhat.
Yeah, I don't think there's a difference between increasing it, 40 feet to 60 feet.
Sorry?
So I don't think cutting off 20 feet really helps anything. Okay.
Maybe
Does
you could
anyone
just
else?
Yeah, I just have a question, a clarification then. So we're here because the ADU is in the side yard setback. We got that.
Yeah.
Are we also here for a floor area ratio variance of some sort? Is that also requested in this application? Because it's over, the existing FAR is over and we're adding more to the FAR?
That's a question for Rebecca.
Yes,
Yeah, I'm asking
we
Rebecca.
require a variance to exceed the allowable floor area in this zoning district.
Okay, we want to be
Okay.
explicit about that, just to clarify for the ADR members that those are two things that we're talking about here.
So it's the ADU permit and a variance.
Okay,
Thanks, Mark.
yeah.
Okay, any other ADR questions before I open it up to the public? Okay, if there are any members of the public that would like to comment on this project, now is your chance to raise your hand and participate, either if you're on Zoom or in the room. Okay, then I'll bring it back to the ADR for comments. I guess I'll go first on this one.
1 second, Mark. There is a
sorry.
member of the public that would like to speak.
Right on air at 19 Redwood, right next door. We're in favor of it. It seems like a pretty good use of the space, and we would definitely rather have it there than not on the garage between us. That's about all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else in the council chambers who wishes to speak?
One second, Mark.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. Sorry, I can't hear anybody who's not actually at the microphones.
Hi, I'm Jeff Shoger. I'm the homeowner. And from our last meeting, I think we came to talk about, trying to reduce the massing and reduce the the facade from the street. We definitely tried to address that. Hopefully we did. And then also, I guess I think it's, just important to note that we did do a fair amount of outreach. And so when I talked to Lisa across the street, Dick Bobo, the Greens, who are all directly affected about it, they're all very enthusiastic and supportive of it. So hopefully you can take that into consideration as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. Is there anyone else in the council chambers who wishes to speak?
No, and there's no one on Zoom. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Rebecca. Okay, now I'll bring it back, and I support the project. I actually like it over the garage. I like how it's set back. The one thing I don't like, which of course is probably obvious by now, is the second story deck that's facing the street. Even though it's set back, I just think it always looks weird if you're on the street and someone's relatively close on the second story. There's no screening in between someone on that deck and the street, just because of the fact you can't have screening there because there's a driveway. Were it somewhere else in the yard, it would be very different. And if Mark Fritz isn't going to point it out, I will, that the entrance area off the deck has a lot of glazing that faces out. And to me, that looks a little strange architecturally, especially if you don't have the deck there. Then I would think just sort of normal walls and windows would be nice. I actually like the idea that the garage is wider in the proposal than it is currently. I think it looks sort of more solid and it goes well with the ADU. And I don't think there's any reason to shorten it, 3 or 4 feet to make it so you can't park there just to keep the same square footage. I'd be fine with it being slightly bigger. And, really we're talking about the difference between the ADU being 4 feet from the property line and 2.5, which I think is insignificant. So I would support the project with the one change being the second story deck and the glazing of the glass that leads off to it. Who would like to go next?
Well, because you went first. Just to.
Okay, I'm happy to go next, Mark.
Thanks, Stephen.
I can generally support the project. I'd like to see a couple specific further modifications, and I could make them specific enough that I think I could make approval contingent upon those small modifications. I understand that we're reviewing this for variance because we're not just rebuilding the garage in place, but we're making it bigger, and the ADU doesn't conform to the 4-foot setback. So I think that it's our responsibility to ask ourselves if this is contextually appropriate on the streetscape. I still think it's just a little bit too far forward, but not by much. I think that if the garage were moved 2 feet back, and if the upper story were moved back an additional 2 to 3 feet, that I would be comfortable with the size. I also, I'm not quite comfortable with the skylight that is the third skylight that's closest to the street. I understand that the bulk and mass was reduced by making an indentation at the deck. That doesn't really help the streetscape. It helps the deck and the relationship to the existing house, so I understand why you did it, but it doesn't go towards the reduction of bulk and mass that we were seeking when we spoke last. And finally, I know that the plate height is higher because of the garage and that this area is higher up than the rest of the house, but I wish that the roof shapes were more complementary, were more cohesive. And so I don't know what to suggest about that. Mark had suggested previously when we met to do a hip at the front. I know that makes the entrance to the deck challenging. I'm mixed about the deck. I think it's okay given the busyness of the street there and stuff like that. So I could support an occupiable terrace on top of the garage there. But I'd love to see a hip roof so that it just is a little bit more recessive there. The gable end is very prominent. So And I'm okay widening the garage or exacerbating the nonconformity with widening. I don't have a problem with at all. If we're talking about the viability of the parking space, certainly the garage could slide towards the house. You wouldn't be losing parking space. You'd be losing the terrace or the cool grotto terrace that's between the buildings, which is a great design feature, is super cool, but it comes at the expense of the sense of bulk and mass on the street. So in sum, I think I'd be in support of the project as proposed with the following conditions: pushing the garage back 2 feet, pushing the facade of the ADU back 2 feet from where it is, or pushing them both back in concert, removing the one skylight that's closest to the street, and I'm open to suggestions from other ADR members, but I wish the roof was just a little more chill.
Thanks, Stephen. Who would like to go next?
I can jump in. I can't
Hold on,
see
Tristan
it.
has a question.
Yeah, sorry, I know that I'm not supposed to ask questions, so I appreciate you giving me the time to do this. But I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the hip, because obviously one of the things we're doing with the way, one, we're matching the garage form as it is now, but two, we're bringing down that plate height on the second floor at the eaves, and that's why we have the dormers, to get the head height for windows and things like that. So if we did end up with a hip, would a Dutch hip be okay? I mean, is there some way of compromising? Because if we bring that hip all the way down to the eave line, I'm concerned we're going to have something where you've got an eyebrow and then you've got windows right underneath, which is not really an attractive.
Certainly. Remind us of the plate height of the low plate and the high plate within the jogs of the roof there.
Yeah, so the high plate, I believe, is roughly, because of the way we did the dormers and the dormer geometries work out, I believe it's roughly 9 feet. And I believe the low plate is somewhere around 7.4, 7.5. It's bounced back a couple of times. So when we get into a 7.5 foot plate height, you know, and then we have an eave overhang, that brings you down to maybe a 7 foot at the bottom of the eave. We get our headers in and we're talking a 6/8 window. And I don't
Well, the header
think
could be
that's
flush.
proportional.
Yep.
What could you do that would have the same style
Character.
as the front house, the same character, the same, that there are no eaves? I mean, there's really no overhang. How could you make it look a little more like the front house?
Yeah, I guess what we did is we took the vocabulary from the existing garage and put it up there above, because we thought that was a nice character and cute. I mean, if we did bring it in there and we did bring that articulation, I would question, you know, the use of cedar, because now we're not creating a separate form or separate mass. We're creating something that really is matchy to the front house, and bringing in that second material just doesn't seem appropriate. I think we'd have to be very much sort of matching the front house, and architecturally that's not as exciting to me, but on the other hand, I am sympathetic to what the, you know, design review board is saying, and so, you know, I just feel like the design has to be cohesive, and when we start changing the roof form like that and making it more to the front house, we have to kind of follow through with some of the other moves that we've made there.
Why don't we let the other members comment? Yeah.
Yeah, so I'll go next. And I actually looked up the notes from the last meeting to make sure, you know, what we said is still what we think or what we're saying. I would just love to see it pushed back as far as possible. I think at the last meeting we said hit the line of the commercial building, which I realized, I know that's not doable. And I realize I'm fine with the 2.5 foot setback because you're right there up against that commercial building. I think it's really well placed. It's a great idea to put it over there, right up against a commercial building. That's a great move. I just think that the new structure is dwarfing the existing house, and it's a completely different language where it looks like this big modern house in front of this neat house with character, which was the original house. I would love to see them actually, I could go for a little more matchy with the roof line that has something to do with the front house. And I think you could sacrifice some of that, you know, the cool covered patio to push the whole thing back. And the recess that you did doesn't doesn't matter that much to me where it is. I'd rather take that square footage and just push everything back.
If you end up pushing
Hold on just a second, just let me finish. And you guys can talk it out later, but there's a giant closet and there's a recess on the second floor plan, a really big closet for an ADU. If you just took the program and pushed it as much as you could, I have no problem with a wider garage. I do think it's actually kind of a better proportion for a bigger house above it. But I stand by my comments from the last time of pushing it back as far as you can, and also Mark Fritz's comment of trying to make a hipped roof or make it have a little more to do with the front house. Those are just my general comments.
Thanks, Joey. Laura?
Sure. I am generally supportive of the project. I think kind of what everyone is saying is if you can push it back a little bit more, that would help with creating this ADU double height over the garage. But I do see like the neighborhood context on that street, and your property also has kind of two front yards. So it's, I can understand why it's a little bit of a tricky site to work with. And I think that balcony, for breaking up the facade, I understand why you did that, especially based on our comments last time. And it's 3 feet 6 inches, so it's not huge. So I'm actually okay with that remaining, because it's not like you're going to be having a party out there. Anything else? Yeah, I think that was really the only thing to add. I guess on that commercial side, there's no like clear story windows. There's nothing. Yep, sorry.
We're too close to the property lines, so we can't, by building code, put anything there. That's why we have a couple of setback skylights. But we'd like to, but we're not able to.
Sure. Okay. Yeah. No, I was looking at like the trees that are there now, and everything it's winter. There's no leaves, but it seems like when there are leaves, it'll be decently well screened. So that helps. Thank you.
It really filters. We're the only people that look directly through some trees at the commercial building, and this new structure is much more attractive. And from where the current story poles are, it does a better job of kind of filtering the view of the giant commercial building. And if you're pushing it back, it's going to actually defeat some of that purpose. It's actually, I'm going to be looking more at an unattractive building. So if you could take that into your consideration.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.
Oh, sorry, just to add one last thing. Also, with the context of this, could be supportive of this slight increase to the FAR.
Thanks, Laura. So Rebecca, do you have?
I think, Mark, I still have
I'm
some
sorry.
comments. Yeah, it's okay. I think I absolutely appreciate the location of the lot. I think it's the right spot for it. I do think the massing from the street, while I appreciate the pullback on the second floor, and I really don't have a problem with the deck per se, because it is more of a feature of the massing versus actually someone spending a lot of time out there. So I can support that deck on the front. I appreciate my colleagues' desire to push it backwards. I think any effort in that regard is positive. As Stephen sort of suggested, 2 feet, I think would help the overall streetscape. But I think I'm still, as you noted earlier in my comments from last time, I think I'd love to see an exploration about the gable, turning into more of a hip, and as we said, matchy or something, pulling the architecture from the existing home into this addition. I think ties the lot better together, reduces that mass on the front where that is significant by lifting that up today. So I think you could even put, as you were describing, the sort of eyebrow set, I would even support a slightly taller plate there so that you could put the hip on that front facade. And you would be reducing the overall mass of that particular building. And I think while the architecture you do have on that ADU is sort of light, airy, and I guess I characterize it as sort of fun, I think it detracts a little bit from the overall development and pulling it together as one unit to the home. And I think I would lean more in that direction. One additional comment, I like the addition of two materials and tones. I'm not sure I would put the white on the bottom and the cedar, the proposed wood on the top. I might actually flip those to some degree to provide a base to the structure and something, sort of almost have it sit on top. It'd be something to explore by flipping those two materials, or at least a color palette. And then more of a detail question, but I think when you look at I had it noted like 1.3, drawing 1.3, you've got that coplanar facade on the lawn side, right, where you go from the white on the top, I'm sorry, the wood on the top to the white on the bottom. I think I would do some articulation there if you're changing materials, so that you can denote, to either have the wood die into something or have the white terminate in some way, shape, or form. You have that sort of frame that covers the patio, the new sort of grotto area. That's coplanar to some degree in height with the deck. I think there's some way to detail that so it's not just abutted two materials. That may look strange. Even if you flip them, you might still need something there to help you pull that off. But I think the big move here is trying to figure out a way to pull a hip off on the front, whether you add a small dormer to again allow that head height, I think is fine. But to reduce it from a gable to a hip, I think would make a substantial impact on the streetscape, which would improve this project overall. I think, those are my arguments. Yeah.
No, thanks, Mark. Fritz. Mark Krushnet, do you think that we can summarize for the applicant whether we think they need to come back with adjustments or they can proceed with specific recommendations?
Well, I think they can proceed with the very specific recommendations that the majority believes they should be. The majority would recommend approval of the project as long as they move everything 2 to 3 feet back from the garage and the ADU, keep the deck, and change the roof to make it some sort of hip, or was it a Dutch hip, or the kind of roof that Mark described, and at the same time trying to have it maybe match the house a little bit more rather than less. Is that a good summary that everyone's happy with? Oh, and the majority recommends approval of the increased FAR because they think it architecturally is nicer to have the garage match the width of the ADU. Am I leaving something out or mischaracterizing anything there?
No, that captures it for me, I think, Mark.
Okay. Sorry, Joey, was there something I forgot or should have said differently?
He did mention to keep the deck. I think that was a consensus.
Yeah, I know. I mentioned, everybody else liked the idea of the deck.
If you could just summarize materials, colors of materials, because I heard some flipping, Mark Fritz.
Well, I think that was more Mark just had a suggestion that they look at the idea of flipping, but he wasn't, opposed to it the way it is.
Yeah, it was a suggestion, not a condition of recommendation. I think it just, heavier, darker materials on the bottom to create that base with a lighter piece on top. But again, that's just a thought.
Could I ask one clarification? Mark also spoke about potentially raising the plate height to allow for the hip. So I just want to get a consensus from the design review board if we're going to put conditions like this on there, what parameters I'm working with. And is that one of them, or do we want to keep that from going up?
Mark, would you like to speak to that more, Mark or Stephen?
I think you're at 7.6 on the lowest plate height. I mean, this is where, getting the pencil sharp and figuring out what makes the most sense. And I think there's a decision to be made, right, from a design perspective, whether or not the character of this ADU matches the tone and the character of the home, the main home, or it is a departure. Putting a hip on your current design characteristics and aesthetics doesn't work for me. I think that would be incongruous with some of the design features you have, like the way you've articulated those dormers, for instance. That does not sit adjacent to a hip roof on the end. So I think there's a decision you need to make from an architectural standpoint. If we're suggesting, hey, a hip roof on the end makes the most sense, to do that right, is there a way to do that and still have fun with it? Is there a way that it needs to bump up to 8 feet? I think those are in the details. 6 inches here or there is probably not going to make or break the height of this project, but I do think the full gable on the end is an excessive on the street front. So I guess I'm suggesting if you can pull it off with 7'6", great, because shorter and pull back is going to be better. But if you require a 7-foot plate or an 8-foot plate, then you could probably pull that off with a hip. Those are my thoughts, but I'd open it up to the rest of the ADR to have that conversation as well.
Thanks, Mark. Would anyone else like to comment on that plate height issue?
Can I just add, I mean, we have a hip roof now, and it's unusable. A lot of the square footage of there is completely unusable. And so now we're talking about like a pretty narrow structure, and doing a hip roof, it creates so much unusable space. We kind of lose square footage, and it defeats the whole purpose, especially when we have we're going to do a side hallway. If the side hallway is like, you can't walk through it. I just don't really understand how a hip roof makes sense from a use.
Let's make this really, Cassie, let's just make clear. We're not suggesting a hip roof that a plate height is at 4 feet or 3 feet, which would be a traditional, like you might have that in your main home, where you do lose the height to walk. What we're suggesting, and you currently have designed, is a 7'6" plate. And we're suggesting, you could potentially look at an 8-foot plate. The hip is somewhat irrelevant to that square footage beneath it. So you wouldn't be cutting off, because I appreciate that. A hip roof at a 3-foot plate, you lose 3 foot on either side and you don't get that square footage. So that's definitely not the recommendation.
Okay. Thank you, Mark.
It's definitely more of it's above your head at 8 foot, like let's go up instead of straight up. So
I mean, Deb and I aren't super tall, but
no, that's a perfectly legitimate comment, and hopefully that clears it up. Like no reduction.
Yes, it's not cutting into the living space whatsoever.
Not cutting the living space, no.
Thank you. Pardon my naivete.
No problem. So Stephen, Joey, Laura, did someone else want to comment on the plate height?
I think if the plate heights are like 9 and 7'4" or whatever they are, and if they're amortized at either 8 or 8'4", something close to that dimension, I don't think it needs to be down at the 7'6". Personally, I think because the hip will do a lot to diminish the volume, and I think to tie the two forms together. So I think I would be comfortable if the lower plate height raised a little bit, and then there were the hip employed.
Do you mean the upper plate height?
Well, as designed, they're dormers sticking out of the plate, right? So the lower of those two plates, I think, is 7'4", and the upper plate of those two is 9, something like that.
But the dormers and that whole...
They don't work together. Yeah, so if you just do a new roof line, the eave of which is at 8'4", I'm making that up, or 8'6" or 8'0", I think that, and then you could put little dormers that match the current dormer of the house, perhaps.
Yeah, that matches style of the front house.
Right.
I could support that and raising the plate height.
Joey, can you press your microphone?
Sorry, I could support raising the plate height to accommodate a hip roof and having it be a very clean volume as it goes back toward the main house without the different dormers raising along that side. I do think if we are going back to the balcony, if we are going to, right after the last project when we said we couldn't have a balcony in the setback, there needs to be findings for this, other than it's a busy street, just in terms of precedent with the town council. And we have people who are 40 foot off of the property line on Lagunitas who they're arguing about a 2 foot wide balcony. I think we have to be consistent. ADR.
I agree with you, Joey, but I have to admit I wasn't consistent there. And I was thinking that this particular balcony was not really much of an occupiable balcony in comparison to the previous project we saw, which was, a 10 by 10.
And this is
obvious. Yeah, I guess I'm thinking the dimension. I think you're correct, and you point out a great note. It's a 3'6" deep balcony. It's barely occupiable, I guess I would say, but it is a fair point. If we could come up with a different architectural move that allowed that second story to be set back, and yet, wasn't a balcony, I'm all for that.
Just a point of clarification, it is not in the rear yard setback, it's only in that side yard setback.
Yes.
Rear yard's 40 feet.
Yeah.
It's
It
in
is,
both.
Yeah.
No, in both. Yeah. Well, I was consistent.
So
Joey, is there something that, I do like the sort of dialogue here. Is there something we could recommend to the applicant in lieu of the balcony that still gets that relief from the second story from the streetscape? Is there a recommendation? I can't come up with one off the top of my head.
Well, planting would
and
be
that's maybe why I defaulted to saying that the balcony was fine.
I think
Planting would be pretty, Mark, right?
I also think the hip roof will provide the relief, and maybe the hip roof with a dormer, it will provide the relief that is currently missing, that we're using the balcony to give relief. Even if it's a 2-story structure and it's pushed back a couple feet. Yeah. I mean, I think we all have to give them better direction, because we're all over the place.
So would that mean that the upper and lower stories are coplanar, Joey? And with a hip roof, that's what you're suggesting?
That's what I would suggest, and push it back as far as it could be. I think that would be. Well, I think more than 2 feet. I mean, I think you could, inside of the residence, you could make that closet a lot smaller and get rid of the notch and push it back as far as you could with still saving the floor plan of the ADU.
And Joey, even though I personally don't like the second story deck, I could see something the other ADR members could say is that.
1 second, Mark. Tristan is saying something.
The reason we cut it back like that was so it wasn't crammed on that outdoor space. Because when we had the building all the way back, this was something that Jeff pointed out when he was looking at it from is that deck starts to be claustrophobic. So it was also an architectural design move to kind of give space to the house, which was also a recommendation and a comment from the July meeting. And so I do feel that step back for the closet and moving the bathroom over and holding that off a little bit once we resolve the sort of challenge with the space below is actually beneficial to the living space in the main house. And I would like to preserve that if possible.
Okay, well, I think we need to wrap this up with our recommendations here. One thing I will say to the other ADR members that if you want to find a reason that you're approving this deck when you generally don't approve decks exacerbating nonconformities in the side and or rear yard setback, is that this one is next door to a commercial building, unlike the other projects. And so there will never be a different residential neighbor there in the future. But either way, I think we've all made our recommendations now, and we should probably call it on this project, unless someone else has a recommendation they want to give to the town council.
I think I've heard all the recommendations. There are quite a few. I'm happy to move it to town council, perhaps emailing you, one of you, the plans before that happens.
I think probably emailing one of the design people on the ADR prior to that would be a good idea.
Thank you.
To Mark Fritz.
Yes.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Short straw, come on.
In the past, I know that we've also had good dialogues between people on the design review board and myself between iterations. I'd be happy to work with one or two of you in that capacity as we move forward to town council to make sure that we're, I'm doing my clients what service they need and making sure that they're getting satisfied for space and things like that, which I know it's an important concern, and we already are at 700 square feet, while at the same time balancing the recommendations of the ARDB. And it feels like to me that to do that successfully, I need a little more back and forth with one or two of you to make sure that when we hit town council, we're not presenting something that ultimately doesn't go forward at that time.
All right, well, thank you, and Rebecca can help you coordinate that. Okay, so that item is now closed, and the next item is information and discussion, if Rebecca has anything for us.
I actually do have something for you guys tonight. At the last town council meeting, I emailed you all the link to the staff report, but I just want to sort of have a discussion if we need to, and provide you with information related to remote participation in public meetings after February 28th, which is when the state of the emergency is lifted. So this ADR group member is subject to the Brown Act. And there are some old rules that I'm sure you're all familiar with, as well as some new rules to allow for ADR members to participate via Zoom. However, I won't go into all of the details of it, but they're a little more restrictive than we have been, seeing over the past couple of years. And it's AB 2449, which allows you to participate over Zoom, provided there is a full quorum in person, right? So there has to be at least 3 ADR members in person. And then there's something called the just cause to excuse you to participate over Zoom, including childcare, contagious illness. I won't go into it all, you've seen it all, but if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer those, hopefully.
Okay, and we can do that individually as well if people have specific questions about their own situation.
Correct, thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. Okay, well, I move that we adjourn the meeting.
Second.
Great, thank you all and have a good night.
Thank you, guys.